Welcome back to another fabulous video. We're going to continue looking at the background of Congress in this section. So whenever we're talking about members of Congress, the people that we just mentioned in the last video, we're talking about voting members of Congress. So people who can vote in Congress. Those are people who represent states, okay? So we have 435 representatives. They represent all 50 states, all of the districts within those states. And we have 100 senators. They represent all 50 states, okay? What about Washington, D.C.? Are they a state? Can they vote? We have non-voting members in Congress who can basically be there as a resident commissioner, can suggest ideas for bills, can discuss in debate and all of that kind of stuff. They just can't vote because they don't represent a state, okay? So our non-voting members come from Washington, D.C., from Guam, American Samoa, the U.S. Virgin Islands, Puerto Rico, and the Northern Mariana Islands. Those last 5 are territories of the United States. So kind of like a state, but not a state. So now some important terms that we need to get down before we can discuss and apply more congressional information. We need to remember what the census is. So way back at the beginning of the school year, we talked about a consensus, which was an agreement among a whole bunch of people. But this is a census, and the census is taken every 10 years, and it's the population count. So earlier this year, you probably, or your parents probably got information about the census. And the census, basically, you have to answer questions like, how many people live in your household? What is the median income of your household? Just stuff like that. And the whole purpose of the census is that we want to make sure that every district or every state is represented how they should be in Congress. So if we see a huge population surge in Missouri, then we probably need to have more representation in Missouri. And that's what the census tells us. Next, we have something called reapportionment. And reapportionment refers to the redistribution of representatives after the census. So remember, we said that number 435, that's set in stone unless Congress wants to change it. So reapportionment, we take all of those representatives and we say, okay, Missouri, you get 8 in 2010, but for 2020, you need 15. So then we would have to somehow somebody around the country would then lose representatives, not because their population decreased, but maybe just because it didn't go up quite as much as ours did. If a state gains or loses a representative, they have to redistrict. So they have to redraw their district lines. And the really easy way to remember that is if you've got 8 representatives in 9 districts, that doesn't work. Every representative represents a district. So if your number of representatives changes, increases or decreases, you've got to redraw those district lines. And typically that's up to the legislative branch within the state. Missouri just recently voted to have somebody from the outside come in and redraw our district lines to avoid any partisan issues. And speaking of partisan issues, that brings us to gerrymandering. So way back in the day, there was this guy named Elbridge Gerry, and he was from New York, and he and his party were responsible for redrawing district boundary lines after reapportionment. So he drew a district that made absolutely no sense geographically. And that's one of the things the districts have to do. They have to make sense. Like you're not supposed to cut counties up, or you're not supposed to divide districts with rivers and things like that. It's supposed to make sense geographically. But also each district is supposed to be as equal as possible in population to that of the others in the state. But Elbridge Gerry's district looks something like a salamander. Okay, and I'll show you a picture in class. So they said that state had been gerrymandered. And what that means is the people in charge have redrawn the districts in their state to benefit a political party. So maybe they grouped up Democrats into one area to drown out a Republican vote, or maybe they split up Democratic-leaning counties all over the state in different districts, so they would be absorbed by Republican-leaning votes. Okay? And that's all for this video. If you have any questions, let me know.